The devotion to lyric writing really shines here.
Yeah, my note is more words, less guitar. That's what I need for this song.
Hello and welcome to another episode of 1001 Album Complaints, a show where longtime friends, musicians, and music critics get together to discuss a classic album as chronicled in the list of 1001 albums you must hear before you die. We'll get you up to speed on the history of the band, how the record was made, the legacy, the context, all the fun stuff, and then we will vote on whether this actually belongs on the list or not. And we'll certainly do some complaining along the way, which you've probably noticed. The word complaint is in the name of this podcast. So if you have already dove in, you're in this with us. So you can't complain when we complain. And mind you, there's some stuff to complain about on this record, and we will do just that. But rest assured, we are musicians ourselves, and we know exactly what it's like to write and record music. So please know that we do this with the utmost appreciation for the craft in mind. I'm Alan. I've been playing music for about 25 years, and this week I'm excited to talk about a group who, in 2015, was described by Stereo Gum writer Tom Brehan as, you guys ready for this? The greatest rock band of the past 2 decades.
That's not right.
Glad to see hyperbole is still alive and well for our English professor, who may correct me on the spelling of hyperbole, or not the spelling, the pronunciation rather. But anyway, the band is Sleater Kinney, and we're going to talk about their third studio album called Dig Me Out. Let's kick things off tonight by playing a clip of... Okay, now that we have a taste of what we're in store for tonight, let's kick it around the room and get some introductions by way of a brief tweet-length review of the album Dig Me Out. Let's start with Marty.
Hey, what's up? If you moved to Portland, Oregon in the early 2000s like I did, there are 2 things getting jammed down your throat. $6 donuts and the music of Sleater Kinney. I'll take the donuts.
Nice.
Oh man, hipsters and donuts, name a more iconic duo. There's actually a donut chain in Philly recently, I heard, that is closing down. I guess there's no longer a market for overinflated dough and sugar for whatever reason.
Not here.
It's like fucking failing at owning a casino. Selling sugary pastries to fat people in Philly? Come on.
Right, your margins are huge. All right, let's kick it over to Rob.
Thanks so much, Alan. Excited to talk Sleater Kinney. My tweet-length review is, this week was a roller coaster of feminist punk rock energy, Gang of 4 angular guitar parts, and the intense, muscular drumming of Janet Weiss. But also, it saw the reemergence of a 1001 Album Complaints deep cut classic, the dreaded goat vibrato.
Oh, yes. We're going to have to get into that.
Where's Adam for this?
Yeah, seriously.
He's our subject matter expert.
His head exploded after he heard this album.
He would not like this. I am confident in venturing that guess.
No.
All right, let's hear from Tom.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to bust out a classic Phil line from our days in the Chop. They're good for girls. I am just kidding, of course. I have a real tweet-length review here. Much like that mole on the small of my back, I didn't like it very much at first, but it grew on me quickly and in weird and unexpected ways.
Okay, well, this is Alan here, and my tweet-length review is... In the year 2015, a singer named Meghan Trainor released a song called All About That Bass, in which she waxes poetic about the virtues of the low-end frequency. That sold 11 million copies. This record contains 0 bass, nor any reference to bass, and sold a mere 1% of that amount. I'll let you do the math. I'm intentionally being snarky. For those who don't follow us closely, there are 2 bass players actually on this episode, which is probably 2 more than you actually need to hear from, but you're in it at this point. Like I said, you're stuck with us, so get ready for some lack of bass takes.
Can we just jump right in with them? I would much rather listen to a band with 2 bass players than a band with 2 guitar players and no bass player. Most definitely.
Well, that's obviously wrong, and the audience knows it.
listen, I don't think it is wrong personally, but I'm also picturing like two incredibly sick bass players.
Name one example.
Of a band with two bass players, there was only one band that I know. It was Ni Hao. What were they? They were a Japanese band that Rob and I played with, and it was three girls. There was a drummer and two bass players, and they kind of rocked. The show was completely ruined by all these like really pathetic fanboys that were very clearly trying to get with them the entire time, which, whatever. It is what it is. Being in a rock band.
So occasionally a bass player can get laid. That's what you're saying.
I can't tell you that from personal experience, but I've heard rumors.
I've heard that Flea got laid a few times, but otherwise the documentation is scarce for sure.
No, but in all seriousness, there's definitely this punky DIY aesthetic to this band that I definitely don't hate. It's never kind of been my preferred genre or approach to making music, but I dig it. At first, this album, I was like, where's the bass? There's no low end. I can't get down with this. And then I just kind of let go of that shit and enjoyed it for what it was. And Rob, I kind of took your mentality of like, people like this for a reason. Let me try to find that reason. And I found the reason actually pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of energy on this record. It's fun. I see why people, especially young people, kinned to it. And it rocks. I think in particular, surprising we're talking about guitars and bass so much. I think the drummer is what really holds the band together in a huge way. So I was pretty impressed with the drumming. It's not my style of music either. However, I'm open to giving it a chance as essential. And like Tom, I see why people like it. The singing is what turned me off in many cases, as my tweet implied. We'll get into it as it goes, but it's like that earnestness over everything approach feels inherently teenage to me. And now that I'm middle-aged, that's not really resonating with me.
Yeah, I assume we're talking about our general impressions now, so I'm going to go ahead and agree with you. I think the sum of the parts is maybe better than the individual parts of this band. Living in the Pacific Northwest and being close to Olympia, Washington, where there are a lot of good music comes from and good record labels comes from, I felt like I had to give this band a chance because so many people like it. But I think I need someone to tell me what I should be focusing on, because I feel like I'm missing something. And maybe Alan, you can help do that in the next hour.
I think part of what did it for me was kind of learning about the band dynamics, and especially how interesting of a time it was with the band dynamics. The only other example I can think of is Fleetwood Mac, but I can't really think of another band where two members of the band had been in a relationship and are breaking up and are writing songs about the breakup. And that's just a really interesting dynamic. And the fact that they still managed to put out good music and make it work for a couple more albums is really impressive, honestly. Not that I have terrible relationships with my ex-girlfriends or anything like that, but I certainly did want to be in a fucking creative endeavor with them while we were breaking up.
Well, they seem to still be on good terms to this day. They've done reunion tours, and it's worked in the long term.
And honestly, I will say I am pretty familiar with that 2015 album that they put out, No Cities to Love. I really like that album a lot. That album is really good. And one of the things that they did on that album, they don't have a bass player, but I feel like they were fucking around with octave pedals. And so they have a lot more low end of their sound on that one, which I think that maybe if they had been a little bit more in that mode for this one, I would have liked it.
One thing you have to keep telling yourself, or I had to keep telling myself, is that this is from 1997. This is not from 2015.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that helped me understand it a little bit more.
Not only is it from 1997, but it's three poor girls in 1997 that don't have unlimited funds and are doing this on a shoestring budget and doing it in a recording studio with no heat and stuff like that. This is not post they've toured with Pearl Jam and played to stadiums and they have all the resources in the world. It did have an authentic kind of grassroots feel to it. And I did dig that. Again, Rob, as you said, like I'm too old to really identify with that, but I dig this concept of young, poor, and hungry making good art.
I could sign on for that part of it. I want to talk more about why, especially in my middle age, I'm trying not to put too much of my middle-agedness into it, not just the appreciation of the music, but the whole thing, the whole punk ethos of, I get it, it's independently made, and that makes it cooler, but the thing I've never liked about punk music is the thread of we don't need to be good. In fact, being good is a barrier to doing what we want to do. We have to be honest, not good. I just detect a strain of that, and I've never cared for it, but I'll leave it there.
We'll talk a little bit about the scene that they originated from shortly, because I think that does tell the story of why they sound the way they do, why they approached music the way that they did. And it's, of course, very much rooted in the punk rock aspects that you're talking about, Rob. My general impression of this, Marty, I don't know that I'm going to be the guy that convinces you that this is good, nor am I really going to try to, because I don't know that I even got there all the way. But I do have to say, it took a while for me, but this really did win me over in a way that I did not expect after the first listen. For me, there was this chasm that I had to cross from being really uncomfortable with everything about this the first time I listened to it. And not uncomfortable in a square, I'm uncomfortable with the feminist aspect. It was not the subject matter, but just the way it sounds. It's really, I mean, you've already touched on some of the hallmarks. Extremely trebly. The vocals are very grating, in my opinion. The instrumentation is not all that palatable, to be honest. But for me, I sort of crossed that chasm after many, many, many listens over into, it's still not my favorite thing, but it has stuck with me in a way, a surprisingly positive way. And Rob, I couldn't help but think back to the journey that you described with the Church's record that we recently did. And I think maybe that's to be expected when you spend more time with these, doing the research and doing more listens. It just sort of grows on you in a different way. But I got to say, the first time I listened to it, I got 30 seconds in. I'm talking verse 1, track 1, and I knew I was not going to like this. and if I never revisited this after that, I would have definitely written this band off for sure. But the more I listened and stayed with it, it was almost like reading a Russian novel or something, where I felt like there was an eventual payoff.
You feel accomplished just for getting through it.
That's a fair way to characterize it.
Listen, it's not helped by the fact that I think that the first track is one of the weaker tracks and one of the least palatable tracks for me personally.
I'll do the flip side of that and agree with you and say that it's the most abrasive track, or one of them. And so this music is purposefully confrontational and challenging, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in the context of their live shows. But yes, to your point, Alan, I agree. I've softened on it as the week has gone on.
One thing that I can definitely say, none of this really sounds stock. None of this sounds like Rock Beat 1 on the drums. And again, I will definitely give all the props in the world to Janet Weiss. I think that she puts together interesting drum beats, maybe not technically complex drum beats, but they seem purpose-made for the songs. And the guitar approach is different. It's not just let me strum on a chord, which would have been a lot worse. So you definitely can't be ambivalent about this music.
Totally. And we'll talk about all those aspects. The drumming in particular, I think she's a very unsung person in this whole outfit. The first time I listened to this and heard her beats, it may seem, again, hyperbolic. I actually thought of John Bonham in a way, not in the ferocity or the technical acumen. Well, actually, no, maybe the ferocity. That might be a fair way to say it. She hits fucking hard, and she changed the dynamic of this band and set their template for another 15 years after this. But
Hold on, John Bonham? Did anyone else hear John Bonham? I didn't.
I hear what Alan's saying. Not so much in the style, because Bonham's so behind the beat and this is very punky. But I agree she hits hard. Some of that might come through just in the production or the mixing. Because they don't have a bass player, I assume they crank up the bass drum, and maybe even the drummer in their playing is compensating for that a little bit.
She's probably playing big diameter drums too.
Exactly.
She cites him as one of her biggest influences. People have described her in that vein of a Keith Moon, a John Bonham. It's different. It's not as technical, but I think the approach and the attack is not as far off as it might sound, in my opinion.
Well, here's where I can definitely sign on to that, which is that all the Led Zeppelin fans out there are going to, write in and tell me I'm a piece of shit for saying this, but a lot of the Led Zeppelin songs were just pretty fucking distorted blues. And what made it sound different was John Bonham's drums. And this is kind of punky, stabby guitar, and what makes it sound different is the drums from Janet Weiss. So I would say that she was that X factor in the way that I think Bonham was the X factor or Keith Moon was the X factor.
Agreed. Now, this band, Sleater Kinney, well, I'm going to talk about the pronunciation first. It's spelled Sleater, and I cannot help but gravitate towards that pronunciation. Everyone, including the band, calls it Sleater Kinney.
Well, I heard English people in interviews calling them Sleater Kinney. And so I don't know, maybe they just are not familiar with the pronunciation, but I also thought it was Sleater Kinney for a long time. But you're right. if you hear Carrie Brownstein say it, she says Sleater Kinney. So,
Well, she also pronounces her bandmate's first name as Corn.
oh,
Did you notice that? Even though it's spelled like Corinne?
I think it is Corin, though. I do think that is the case. Unless they're in the Northwest. They're taking some liberties here.
It might be a regional accent thing. That's my point.
That's a possibility. Marty, can you weigh in on this?
Well, yeah, I'm sure you'll talk about there's an exit off I-5 called Sleater Kinney Road, and it's named after two families who settled in that area outside of Olympia. I would trust the band's pronunciation because they lived near that exit.
two families that finished killing off the Native Americans in that area.
Right. Yeah. God.
I mean, it's fucking true, probably.
Likely true. Anyway, well, the fact checkers will come out en masse. But the band itself, let's talk about a little bit about them and the record. As I mentioned, was their third studio release. It was released on April 8th, 1997 on a startup record label called, of all things, Kill Rock Stars, which, hey, I can get by that.
So I actually have an interesting story about Kill Rock Stars Records, where when we were first getting started in the Chop back in the day, we'd all just moved to San Francisco. We're just getting started, and we had basically no talent. I was on the drums, and I've been playing the drums for less than like 8 weeks at this point. It was like terrible production for any of the demos that we had. But a very good friend of mine who I worked with had dinner with somebody who was very high up at Kill Rock Stars, and she was a complete believer in the Chop because she'd seen us play like one time and chatted up this guy about how great we were. And I got the business card. She got his business card and was like, yeah, totally reach out. And I reached out and I sent him the very early demos that we had, Rob, before we even made like the gold stars. And yeah, got complete total silence on the other end of that email string, regardless of how many times I sent that out.
They didn't immediately present you with a multi-year record deal?
Yeah, someone high up in Kill Rock Stars, worked on like the 32nd floor of some, Kill Rock Stars skyscraper, I'm sure.
I'm just pointing out that when I first was like, oh, Kill Rockstar Records, fuck that label.
Well, we can maintain that position here for the remainder of the episode. But it's really, as we've alluded to, it's hard to tell the story of this band without talking about the scene that they came from. They were very much rooted in what has been referred to as the Riot Grrrl scene of the early to mid 90s.
How are you spelling girl in that one, Alan?
Well, it's funny that you should ask. It's stylized as grrr. So there's 3 R's. The girl reference is to this idea that women in general express having felt their most confident in life as girls. And so I think this is sort of hearkening back to this idea of women in their more pure, more self-confident mode in their life. But it was ultimately a feminist punk rock movement that really originated in Olympia, Washington, as Marty mentioned, in the Pacific Northwest, which is about an hour from Seattle. There also were some roots in the DC area, which that part of it was not clear to me in the research, although I have a funny sort of anecdote about that momentarily. So being right near Seattle in the early 90s, obviously this was going on in the background of the much more visible grunge scene of the Northwest, but really the movement was a response to what was happening in the very male-dominated punk scene at the time, which to me, I was a little surprised to learn about some of this. I had always viewed punk rock in general as extremely inclusive and open to, come as you are, no matter what kind of person you are. But apparently at the time was very male dominated, was considered boys music, and female punk rockers were really swimming upstream in a lot of ways. It was really hard for them to start their own bands. It was hard for them to even be in bands. And if they were, it was generally as a token front person with a bunch of dudes in the background.
Or they were the bass player just plunking along.
I have had friends that have been in bands in the Olympia music scene. And part of the context here is Olympia is a pretty small community, and the music scene there is very tight. The people that are in bands there are real supportive of other bands. And if you are in that scene, you will be like propped up. You'll have opportunities to go on tour, especially on the up and down the West Coast. A friend of a friend's band got found out by the Future Islands and got picked up on a tour with them. So I think there's something about that plays into this too, is it being a real supportive kind of community for music by musicians.
Well, it's also a college town, right? But I wanted to comment on the punk being non-inclusive. I think all movements just because of human nature. All movements start this way, as idealistic and inclusive, and then they become about a certain style. And it's, you know what I mean? I just think this happens to most things in life, and punk is no exception. Sorry, punk rockers, but if you're not dressed a certain way, you don't belong at the punk show.
Right. It becomes a scene where the point is to be seen, you know?
Yeah, I definitely have always had that impression that punk was not super inclusive. Maybe they thought that they were inclusive, or maybe it started as inclusive, and then once it got cool, I think anytime anything gets cool and a whole bunch of people want to do it, the original people who were doing it are like, fuck you, you can't do this, this is my thing type, you know, especially when it's a movement built upon being an outsider. So I could totally see being frozen out of the punk scene because you're not punk enough or cool enough or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's very much concept versus reality. The concept being, hey, we're the leftovers, we're the people that don't fit into normal society. You would think that would be a catch-all for everyone, but yeah, people are people, and teenage boys are teenage boys, and so that, I mean, if you really play this out, I guess it's not that surprising that it was really a bunch of assholes, frankly. And so this scene really, it's been described by a lot of the people involved as being very matriarchal. Women doing their own tours, booking their own stuff, recording their own albums, really doing as much as possible without men being involved. And in fact, I think there was a lot of lack of respect for the Lilith Fair scene at the time, because even those groups still had dudes playing in the bands and things like that. So this was very DIY. We are going to do this ourselves. What I found most hilarious in looking this up, and I tried my damnedest to corroborate this, but it is on the Wikipedia page for the Riot Grrrl movement. According to this Wikipedia article, the movement originated in 1991 when a group of women from Olympia and a group of women from DC held a meeting about sexism in their local punk scenes in the US. And again, I couldn't corroborate if this meeting took place, but something about that felt really unpunk to me. Like,
Yeah, having a meeting.
Yeah, that's some nerd shit going on right there. Yeah.
But regardless of whether this meeting happened or not, what is pretty well documented is that it started manifesting in these punk scenes that a few female punk rockers were putting out that almost became like manifestos in a way of females in the punk rock scene. And out of this came a few groups like Bikini Kill and Bratmobile and others. And so the scene was really active in the Northwest for a good 4 or 5 years. Around the mid-90s, though, the scene really started to die down a little bit. And I think part of that was because there was a lot of misrepresentation in the media of what they were trying to do. It started taking on a life of its own. Then you started having bands like Spice Girls that were kind of co-opting this feminist message in a different way. But one of the bands from that era in that scene was a band called Heavens to Betsy, which, by the way, I really like that name. I have a friend who says that a lot, and it just seems very folksy. And
That's total Flanders statement.
Oh, yeah.
that is a very Flanders statement. Now, this band, Heavens to Betsy, was fronted by a woman named Corin Tucker. Meanwhile, there was another group in that same scene. They were called Excuse 17, and one of their members was a woman named Carrie Brownstein. These two bands eventually fizzled out as this scene started to die out, at which point Corin and Carrie started playing and writing songs together in 1994 for a project that they would eventually name Sleater Kinney. This was already alluded to as well. Unbeknownst to a lot of people at that time, mostly their family members and even some friends, they were in a relationship together. And after Corin graduated from college, they took a trip to Australia together, and it was during this trip that they stayed up all night and evidently wrote what would become their self-titled debut album in 1995. They then wrote a follow-up record titled Call the Doctor a year later in 96, but it was right around the third album in 1997 when this came out that was considered their breakthrough album. So this was a point where they started becoming critical darlings, really major players in this emerging indie rock scene, and is often credited for what propelled them into, Marty, to your point of all you hear is Sleater Kinney in the Northwest. I think this record had a lot to do with that.
A couple details that I read about that I wanted to mention about their history. They didn't just travel to Australia. They relocated to Australia to start their band. I read Carrie Brownstein's book, Hunger Makes Me a Modern Girl, I believe it's called. I read it back when it was published, but I sort of looked back through it, flipped through it this week. And it's very well written. Carrie Brownstein, very smart person, good writer, good philosophical elements in there. So I would recommend it as a music memoir. But she talks about how they just wanted to get away from Olympia. They didn't want to sound like any of the other bands they were listening to in that scene. And so they'd never been abroad in their lives. They just decided to go to Australia to meet up with a pen pal who said they could crash on his floor to start their band. And yeah, they wrote and even recorded that first album there with a drummer they were borrowing from some other Australian band over there. So I thought that was just an interesting and audacious move. And then, of course, they came back shortly after, realizing that was not a great plan overall.
Well, they moved there and then they write it all in like less than the time it takes to fly there. And then like, oh shit, like what are we going to do now? We've done everything
Right.
we was going to do. I guess we'll just go back home. All right.
Well, I wanted to mention, just because it has a personal connection to us, that first record, they brought it back to Olympia and mixed it with one Tim Green.
Oh, yeah.
Who had a studio in Olympia at the time, and who was a friend of ours who's mixed most of our records at this point and now has a studio in Grass Valley.
Every once in a while, I do have to remind myself of how much Tim is slumming it when he works on any of our stuff. And I just appreciate that a little bit. I'm like, thanks, Tim. You're a cool dude. Thank you.
Yeah, money speaks.
No, he actually gives us very good prices.
I think it was last week or the week before where we talked about the musician's retirement plan, the smart musician's retirement plan, which is Tim Green was in that DC punk scene in the 80s. He was in a band called Nation of Ulysses, and then he later formed a band called the Fucking Champs. But the point is, the whole time he was doing that and having some success and touring, he was also building his studio. He was building his reputation. And now that he doesn't tour anymore, right? That's what he does. And that's a really smart plan that only certain people follow in this world. So props to him.
Yeah, absolutely. What was interesting about this period of time for them when they were starting to work on this third album, there's really two pivotal moments. One of which was they had been keeping this relationship. I think close friends knew about it, people in their inner circle, but it wasn't widely known or reported about until they did an interview with Spin Magazine, who essentially outed them to the world and to everybody, to their parents. And that became a big kind of catalyzing moment for them. In fact, there's a song that we'll talk about shortly that is about that topic specifically. But that really jaded them a lot towards wanting to do interviews. It seems like they've opened up a lot more in the last, decade or so, that they do a lot more media. But I think it just kind of reinforced the idea of you can't really trust anybody at this point.
So can you dig into that story a little bit more and tell me why it is super fucked up that Spin did that?
Carrie said in her book that she did not come up in the interview at all. They were very purposely hiding that. It sounds like she didn't know exactly, but it sounds like it came from some unknown source that was not them. Maybe one of their friends. I'm not sure. Or maybe they were just taking a stab at it. But that's definitely considered outing. It's not something they talked about to the press. It's not something they showcased when they were in the interview in any way.
I totally get that. If they took a stab at it, that's super fucked up. But if somebody came to them and said like, hey, did you know these guys are in a relationship? I'm not necessarily saying that the context of the 90s makes it better or worse or anything like that. But from the standpoint of a journalist, like that's probably the most interesting thing about this entire dynamic. So you would
then go fact check it with the people though, and then ask their permission to print it. I think that would be the correct way to do it.
So there's some gray area in this where when you come into information, you certainly would not show somebody your article before you publish it. Like no journalist will do that. No editor will do that. But I do agree that if you come upon this information that you're getting most likely secondhand, you should fact check that.
Well, I would like to say there's a difference between fact checking and asking for permission to write something, right? And not to get into a fucking journalism ethics discourse here, but you don't go to a politician and say like, hey, I hear you're fucking somebody who's not your wife. Can I write that? Like, you write that, even if they say no, don't write that, right? If you have the information and you know that it's correct. So I'm not necessarily defending what they did. I'm saying I don't have the context. It seems like it is, you guys were coming really hard. Like, this is super fucked up. I don't know if it's necessarily super fucked up.
I'm standing by my initial take that it's super fucked up. I think it's just basic humanity, man. I agree about the permission thing, but it's going to be inflammatory and create a lot of chaos for them. And they're young people. I don't know. All that together makes it very immature and I think unethical. That's just my take.
All that I'm saying is I do think that the dynamic of two people in a band being in a relationship is somewhat pertinent to the story of the band. It'd be different if you were just like, hey, Carrie Brownstein's gay and had nothing to do with the band. And that was just like her personal life. That I would think that'd be way more fucked up. But two of the people in the band being in a relationship seems pertinent to me, and frankly made me enjoy the music more when I learned that. It made me see more depth in the lyrics.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That's an interesting part of their story, certainly. So it just feels like that should have been a part of the interview then.
Yeah, I'm not saying that this journalist is good. Most journalists suck. Like, terrible. I mean, I got a degree in journalism. It was not hard. I didn't go to class ever. It's pretty easy.
English was the one major where you didn't actually have to know shit. You just had to know how to tell people that you know shit.
Much like this podcast.
We've been preparing for this our whole lives, haven't we? Okay, so this was one of the big pivotal moments of a catalyst for this album. The second one we've already alluded to, but it's a good segue into our favorite segment, which is called By the Numbers. I want to start with the number 4.
By the way, Alan, that was the least convincing "this is our favorite segment" read I've ever heard.
I always do wonder if it truly is any of your favorite segments, but go on.
It's a segment. We like it sometimes. The number is 4, which is the number of drummers they went through by the time they got to recording this record. I guess they were the American version of Spinal Tap or something. The other drummers didn't die, but before they recorded this, they hired Janet Weiss to play drums. And
I noticed they also give her writing credits on the songs, which they fucking should, right? They say they're composed by all of the members of the band, right?
It doesn't say that on Spotify, because I was going to say that I saw an interview with all 3 of them from somewhat recently. And Janet Weiss said, when we wrote and recorded that album together, and I felt like there was a bit of like a cold look on the other 2 band members' faces when she said that. But it looked to me like the Corinne Tucker and Carrie Brownstein are the composers on Spotify anyway.
I'm just going by the Wikipedia where it says all music composed by Sleater Kinney, which I would assume means that the money's getting split evenly, which it should be.
She ended up parting ways with the band in 2019. They have a different drummer today. And the reason that Janet cites for leaving the band at that time was that she, at that point, felt that she had lost the creative equality that she had. And they even told her flat out at that point. I don't know how much changed in the relationship of the band, but at that time, they were a little bit more like, you're kind of just the drummer at this point, and that wasn't cool with her. So she bounced at that point.
Because to hear Carrie Brownstein tell it in terms of their songwriting process and why it would be so important to get the right drummer in place was they just threw ideas out there. I don't get the impression they were a band, at least at this time, who was sitting down with a notebook and carefully erasing lyrics and running melodies and tweaking them. It was sort of first idea is the best idea kind of approach. And they liked that her and Corinne's melodies and guitar parts purposely went against each other. So I'm just pointing out that plus the fact that they're a trio, there's only 3 instruments to even listen to. You really need a drummer to get in there and pull their own weight.
And I will say, if you look at, I'm just going by the Wikipedia. I don't have the physical albums here to look at, but the first 2 albums are songs composed by Carrie and Corinne. And then the next albums after that are all by Sleater Kinney, like composed by Sleater Kinney. So, and I think that that's right. I think that's the right way to do it, especially with a drummer who's adding as much as Janet Weiss was.
Okay, the next number, somehow we're still in by the numbers here. The next number is 2, which is the number of singles from this record. The songs are Little Babies and One More Hour, both of which we'll discuss. I couldn't tell if I was surprised that there were only 2 singles or that there were even enough for 2 singles that were worthy of putting out. I couldn't tell. It just seemed like a strange number of singles to put out. The number 8, which is the number of days that this was recorded over. This seems like not that much time to me in a studio to produce an album, although for a 30-minute record, it kind of tracks.
Even this album?
When your first idea is your best idea, then I think it's enough time.
Yeah.
Well, what was funny, they described this as some affordance to have 8 days because I think they had maybe 4 the previous time. So
they were so indulgent, they went back and put claps in occasionally.
Certainly didn't go back and undo mistakes, I'll say that much.
The one song has a saxophone.
For all these by the numbers segment, has there ever been one with like when you add up the numbers, it's still like low 2 digits? It's like
It's just all that is up to 69.
right.
And then the final number is 189, which is the place that this occupies on the Rolling Stone greatest albums of all time list. So having said all that, we're talking some shit and we're complaining, but I happen to think that ranking is quite generous. But there is a consensus around this band that seems to persist that puts them in this sort of stratosphere. Speaking of the greatest of all time, that would, of course, be all of you, the fans of this here program. And we seriously want to thank you for coming along on this ride with us. We have, funny enough, done this kind of thing for decades, sitting around complaining about music, with the only audience being maybe a grumpy bartender who's ready to give us the boot. So to still be doing this, but with an ever-growing crew of people along for the ride is immensely gratifying. We will keep doing this for free as long as you're willing to listen and interact with us. But if you are looking for other ways to support, you can do a number of things. You can leave us a 5-star review. You can tell a friend. You can join our Patreon. Even at the free level, it's a huge boost to what we're doing. But even $5 a month means we can keep putting out new bonus shows like our recent 80s March Radness song battle. So again, really appreciate the support. And we love you all, unlike the lack of love I have for everyone else on this here episode. Okay. You guys ready to talk some songs here?
Yeah, sure.
Let's do it, baby.
Okay. Let's get back to the title track that we explored early on, which is called Dig Me Out.
Energetic song, but the vocal is really abrasive. I put this on in the car with my wife very briefly when she asked about what we were covering this week. And within 20 seconds, she's like, please turn this off. I can't deal with this. This is the one, though, I'll give props right off the bat. I know we've already been talking about it, to Janet, the drummer. I think the drums are really cool. And what I read about their long drummer search, because as you mentioned, Alan, it's their third record. They had 3 or 4 drummers, depending on how you count it, before this, and they had to fire them at various times because they weren't working out. And Carrie Brownstein in her book tells the story about when Janet first came to the audition. It was like instantaneous kismet, right? That they felt like for the first time, the drummer wasn't just playing along with them. The drummer was leading them, was like a force to be reckoned with in the room. And so I think you can really hear that on a track like this.
Well, funny enough, I thought, as a side note to that, in hearing Corin Tucker talk about that first time that they played together, she says all the same things you did about how additive it was. But then what she found was most impressive, which I thought was hilarious, is she learned all the songs. Like, she showed up and she knew the songs.
Oh, right.
And it's like, okay, low bar, but...
Knew the songs from the previous album, you mean, because they hadn't written, just because we talked about the writing credit earlier. But yes.
Yeah, I think this song made me learn that length of time that something exists it can be very subjective. And so I like the length of the song.
You like the length of the song?
I do, yeah.
I don't know, man. Like, I feel like if you look up caterwauling in the dictionary, like, this is going to be there. It is, like you said, wow, that vocal comes in pretty in your face. And she goes up high with it really early in the song. I really actually like the crescendo at the end of the song. She kind of comes out of the B part around like a little after 2 minutes, and she kind of comes up high on the let me go, 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 dig me out. Like, that works. But when right 20 seconds into the song, she's already doing the really high shout, I'm just like not prepared for it. I'm like, ugh.
That's kind of a consistent complaint of mine that I wrote down pretty quickly, is why is she always at the top of her range, the absolute top, even in the verse sections of some of these songs? It just gets tiring.
It's the grrr.
It's the grrr of the girl.
It felt like it's just a series of body blows where it was just one after another, and eventually I kind of just relented to it. It's abrasive, it's aggressive. It almost reminded me, it was so distracting, and not just on this song. I think it's worse in another song that we'll talk about. But the vocals reminded me, not this extreme, but you know the Hocus Pocus Focus song where the guy's yodeling?
Oh, yeah.
It's cool.
Hell yeah.
But it's all you can think about, and it's all you can pay attention to. And I think that where I will say I think it works is because they were used to playing live and playing these really high energy punk shows. And I think that's where it does work, where you can be a little bit atonal, you can go for it. But when you're in a studio, and you're right, when you're hitting the gas and flooring it immediately without, she does let it simmer for like a couple lines or maybe a verse, but she gets to that high end really quick. The other thing that we haven't touched on, and I wonder how much this affects it, is they detune their guitars to C sharp. And I wonder if that makes it feel like, hey, that gives me a little more headroom to go up with my vocal range because the rest of it is tuned down. I don't know. Did you guys pick up on that at all?
It's interesting. That's traditionally like a metal thing, right? To get lower tones, but perhaps it's partly because they don't have a bass player. And that way, if you are going to play on the low end of the fretboard, you're going to get a slightly lower range of sound. But I don't feel like they use it that much. That's why it's a little confusing.
Not in this song, definitely. I feel like the lack of the bass player is the most evident when both of the guitars are doing kind of stabby lead line things. When they got one guitar laying out on chords, it fills it out so much more. But this song, I really felt the lack of the bass. It sounded thin, and it just didn't rock in the way that it could.
Okay. Let's turn our focus to the next song on our focus list, which is called One More.
As a cool ass drum beat. That's immediately the thing that stands out to me. And in my opinion, probably the best song on the album. I just think it's different. It's unique. It made me understand the band more than any other song on this focus list.
This is definitely my favorite song. I do think that I like the softer vocal approach that Corin takes on this one. She's not shouting at you. She has a nice voice when she presents it in this more delicate way. I also think that the background story of this song makes it very compelling. Like, I just think that that's a really interesting dynamic of two people breaking up, and it seems like one of them is more upset about it than the other, and the other's kind of telling them to chill the fuck out, and then one's saying like, I can't handle this.
This is this song. There's undercurrents of this relationship. I don't know, Rob, you might have more context on this having read Carrie's book. I don't know if it was because of that spin article that made the relationship dissolve, but their relationship did dissolve as this album was being recorded. And this song is about that specifically.
Kind of sounded to me from Carrie's take, she seemed fine with making herself the villain. And the way she sort of told it was, I didn't think of it as the super serious relationship, and I just ended it, and I wasn't even that sad about it. And little did I know that my bandmate was seriously heartbroken and writing all these songs. She even made it sound like at the time they were playing these songs in the studio, she did not realize they had anything to do with her or their relationship.
That's brutal. I gotta say, that's pretty brutal for Corin to be like, because I wouldn't say it's like, she doesn't use her name or anything like that, but it's not super veiled as to what she's talking about. And for Carrie to be there singing along to it and being like, what this about me? What are you talking about? Oh, yeah.
That's what I remember from it. And from what I looked through this week, I could be somewhat misquoting, but she seemed blissfully unaware, at least a bit.
I did think this was one of the stronger songs. It was nice to see something a little different from the in-your-face punk rock. I thought it was really cool. One of the cool sound bites, I think you invoked Gang of Four earlier, Rob.
Absolutely, yeah.
Carrie claims that she came up with this riff after listening to that album Entertainment endlessly, and I think that kind of tracks with what you hear on that record a little bit.
Absolutely. I get big Gang of Four energy from this one, and in general from this band and this record. It reminded me in many ways of Entertainment, which I think we've gotten a few emails about our review of. I'm not sure. I'll have to check the scrolls, but people seem to have a lot of opinions about it. No, I think it's angular, cool, especially on the guitar side. Yeah, actually, the whole instrumentation of this is very good. I didn't label it my best track, partly because this vibrato just really was ringing in my ear. I would have just tuned that down. That feels like a crutch for singers. So I didn't love it.
I think we need you to give us a demo, because just so we know, Rob, what this actually sounds like. Let's hear it in your. No.
I had to say, one of the things that on my first listen through to this album, I did not know if Carrie Brownstein was the lead singer or not. And then as soon as her voice came up on this song, I was like, oh, that's Carrie Brownstein's voice. Like, her voice is so recognizable. It matches her speaking voice so well. And I just think that that's kind of weird. Like, a lot of people's speaking voice and their singing voice don't really match each other. But her speaking voice and singing voice sound fucking exactly alike.
You know, it just seems weird that we haven't mentioned it yet for someone who might not know that Carrie Brownstein is also famous for her sketch show called Portlandia. She's one of the 2 leads with Fred Armisen on that show. So just in case there's someone living under a rock who didn't know that this person in this band is also Carrie from Portlandia, a funny, very funny sketch show about Portland. That's happening.
Very funny and very accurate, which is kind of sad.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I and Tom, I assume, would know her voice. I'm just making sure that the audience knows that.
All right, let's turn our attention to the next song on our list, which is called Turn It On. This was my find on the record. There isn't anything particularly special about it or groundbreaking or novel. I just thought this grooved really hard. And this was the song that I think after a few repeated listens was the one that started to turn me around on them a little bit. And I think Carrie's guitar style, she has this very surfy sort of element to it. It's not super technical, but it's airy and it occupies space in a certain way that I really liked this song. I thought it just had a nice groove to it. I do think this is one of the songs that could have possibly benefited from a bass player just because of the kind of movement it has.
I just wanted to... Didn't we? It was a couple weeks ago that we made fun of Living Colour for shouting Cult of Personality many, many times at the end of their song.
Yes.
That's just what it reminded me of.
Well, that was just an excuse for Tom to invoke Cumbersome.
It was masterfully done, if I say so myself.
It's a good segue.
A lot of these songs to me like kind of made me reflect on my approach to listening to music because, you know, I always try to find something to latch on to. Whether it be a certain instrument, a melody, a lyric. I'm a big lyric person. And I just didn't find anything in a lot of these songs that I could latch onto, which made me ask myself, like, or maybe realize that I'm not a very, like, emotional music listener. I kind of analyze it rather than absorb it. And I think a lot of people that I respect that like this band are able to absorb the music in a way that my brain just won't allow me to.
Marty, that does not surprise me at all. You're the guy who like introduced me to like Return to Forever back in the day and stuff like that. You like very
heady,
technically proficient, heavy music.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think you're describing almost thinking the music through rather than feeling it in a certain sense.
Yeah.
Maybe that's broad generalization, but
no. That's kind of what I'm saying. It's just hard for me to turn that part of me off and absorb the music and have it kind of enter me through my ears without having it pass through all these filters, you know?
Well, I think you alluded to it earlier, Alan, that it's, for me, the challenge is more this style of let's just start the car at 100 miles per hour. There's not a lot of room to build a lot of these songs. There's not a lot of dynamics within these songs. The dynamics that are there are created usually by the drummer. And so while I agree it's never not interesting, a lot of it blends together a little bit to me, but at the same time, I could see why it would be really exciting to see this band live. So it is very contextual. I'm just sitting here at my desk typing away, listening to this. It's not quite the same thing.
In your mid 40s. Also, not like an angsty teenager.
That too.
I will say, dude, I'm just a sucker for the I want to hold your hand, like tap, tap, tap drum beat. I just like that a lot. And I know it's so hackneyed, but it really does it for me. And that combined with the surf rock feel made me really dig this song a lot. And I give Janet Weiss a lot of the credit for sort of the driving feel of this song. I think she did a lot to influence the final product. So I think this was successful.
Yeah, this was one of the only songs that I felt like I could bob my head to. And I'm a little bit opposite Marty as far as what you're describing, where, I mean, we're doing this show, so clearly we think about music in a very perverse way. But something that just makes me bob my head a little bit, that goes a long way. And I think this song snapped me out of that uncomfortable, dissonant, kind of abrasive aspect. Speaking of abrasive, let's turn our attention to the next song on our list, which is called Words and Guitar. I wonder if the best use of my time this week would have been to count the amount of seconds that there's borderline yodeling happen. I mean, I wouldn't say this is my complete low point because I think there's some cool parts about the song, but this is where I just thought enough's enough, and the vocals are almost ruining it for me.
The devotion to lyric writing really shines here.
Yeah, my note is more words, less guitar. That's what I need for this song.
There's a lyric in here that goes, "I dream of quiet songs." And I was like, me too, Sleater Kinney, me too.
So my biggest issue with the song is the sort of herky-jerky start-stop aspect of it. And they play the line, they do the little lick, and they play the line, do a little lick, and they sort of stop, start, stop, start. About 1:20 into the song, and the song is only 2 minutes and 20 seconds long, they basically stop with the constant stop-start herky-jerkiness. And then I actually kind of dig the song. I dig the last minute of the song, but the first minute of the song, first minute 20, I'm like, just fucking stop doing that. Give me something that feels continuous.
Yeah, it's very staccato, and it does not allow you to get into any kind of flow or a groove. I do agree that that breakdown is actually kind of cool, and you know, you hear actually a different instrument. I don't know if sort of bells they bring in, if it's marimba or something, but it's so refreshing to hear something that's not guitars and drums that as soon as I heard a little bit of bell action, I was like, okay, and then the song was over.
I think it's the song Heart Factory where Janet Weiss is like actually hitting the space heater that's in the recording studio, because apparently they were all playing in like gigantic thick jackets and having to do calisthenics in between takes because it was a like historic snowstorm and there was no heat in the building at all.
Yeah, no heat in the studio, and that's rough. Because especially for when you're trying to use your limbs, I mean, it's not just about discomfort. You need fine motor skills in your hands to do any of this stuff. That's hard when you're really cold.
The guitar especially, they're probably not banging out 20 reps of this, to be honest. So,
well, we didn't mention it, but I just thought dropping that anecdote about the name, it came from the song title, Dig Me Out. But they said there was a period in the recording of this where their van was snowed in and they couldn't get back to the studio. And they had to literally shovel and dig out the van. And that's what made them fully commit to the album title.
One thing about this song, too, is I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I get a little bit of a Roxy Music, Brian Ferry vibe that I kind of like.
Well, I think astute listeners might call us out on this if we don't mention it. The lyrics to this that we made fun of words and guitar, do sound a little like David Byrne lyrics. And I have stated many times that I love David Byrne and his lyrics. I think all of us on the podcast like Talking Heads quite a bit, but still.
I don't have a problem with the lyrics. I have a problem with the singing. Last track on our focus list, which is a song called Little Baby.
Listed as my favorite song. I think this is the second single. The one Tom and Marty said was their favorite was the first single. So we're sort of agreeing that they picked the correct singles. But I just think there's a nice build in this song. It's maybe the poppiest number. It reminds me of some of the best Ramones tracks, which themselves, you know, that's a version of early punk that feels like a throwback to 50s pop music. And this does that.
I think that this probably killed live. I think that this chorus, particularly live, probably killed.
I like this song a lot. This was one of my favorites on the album. I also think it was great placement on the record because I think if you played the record version of this might have been the one that opens side B. Kind of needed this. You needed something that was a little bit, I did anyway, something that was a little bit catchy, a little bit poppy. I got some Go-Go's vibes from this as well, and definitely picked up on the Ramones thing, which they have been very clear was a big influence for them. I also thought it was a good example. I don't know if I would call it quite call and response with the vocals because they're running over each other a little bit, but I thought it was really nice interplay and where you can really hear the difference between their voices, and it does sound like they are really synced up in the way that they're delivering the vocals on this.
Also, there's a tom fill that kind of goes through, that kind of adds to that dynamic. So it's almost like two voices and then a do with the tom that kind of like plays off it all. That's really good. The drums are really recorded well in this song, tone-wise, and on the whole album, actually.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, again, Janet Weiss just puts together these kind of like cool, non-intuitive, purpose-built beats for the song. And I think that especially what she's doing over the chorus, it's just great.
Yeah. Now, that said, the bridge where they just shout the name of a popular Rolling Stones song again and again felt
A lot of the album it lives in the underbaked charm, shall we say?
Sure. Because it made me think of the Rolling Stones song Mother's Little Helper, which is a cool song from the 60s. But then I looked it up, and younger viewers might not know that Mother's Little Helper was like a popular nickname for Valium at the time, which is just kind of sinister, and I like it.
What is Daddy's Little Helper is just binge drinking? Is that what that is? Like,
Hasn't helped me that much, I gotta say. Okay, I think we've waxed philosophical enough about this record, and I think it is time for us to levy a verdict on Dig Me Out. Marty, does this belong on the list?
The one thing I noticed about this album, and I've noticed about other albums on Spotify, is if you look at the track listing, you'll see this kind of like relationship in song order and the amount of listens it has. And this one starts at like 6 million on the first song. And then by the end of the album, it's down to like 400.
a lot of people whose musical opinions I really disrespect voted no on this album, so I'm going to have to vote yes. I enjoyed this week. I did. And it was not easy at first, but I did find myself coming back to it, and without a lot of trepidation. I wasn't, oh God, I got to listen to this again. I was like, I actually dig this more each time I listen to it. And for that fact, I will say you definitely should listen to it, because I do think that it will become enjoyable if you put the work in. I also do think that they are important in the sort of underground rock canon. And if you want to be well-read and you want to be able to intelligently talk shit on music, you probably should be able to hold a conversation about this at a dinner party with a pretentious jackass like one of us. So listen to the album. It will probably pay off if your friends are annoying assholes like us.
And they probably are, because you're listening still at this point.
Yeah.
I'm going to say yes, too. And if I had only listened 6 to 7 times, that might not have been enough to push this over for me. But because I felt like for this exercise that we do, I had to keep going with it, I eventually turned a corner, and I agree. I think they are an important band, and they rock pretty hard, and it's abrasive. We've levied a lot of complaints about it. It's not necessarily my thing. I really am curious to see what they sound like live. I'm sure it's a much different ball game now versus when they started, 20 something years ago, and they have a different drummer now and they're older. So who knows? So with all that said, it is a yes for me, but it took a while. Okay, well, congratulations, Carrie and Corin.
Do not leave Janet on the cutting room floor. Come on.
Well, I guess because she's not in the band anymore and she's doing her own thing, but congratulations, you made
For our recommendations. And finally, the rarest of emails, a self-boosh. So first, Kevin from Norway writes, just take a moment to let that sink in, that we have listeners in Norway. First of all, gotta say, really enjoy your podcast. Discovered a couple weeks ago, and I'm already many hours deep into it. I don't think my wife and kids enjoyed a marathon of 1001 album complaints in 12 hours straight in the car during the Easter holiday. But hey, he goes on to say, I listened to the Manic Street Preachers episode. I'm a big fan of the band, and you guys said they were influenced by the album Screamadelica by Screaming Trees. I know you meant to say it's Screamadelica by the band Primal Scream, an album that I very much hope is on the 1001 album list. First of all, that was 100% my bad. You're right. It is Screamadelica by Primal Scream. Primal Scream is a Scottish band that I know nothing about, and Screaming Trees is a Washington State band that I also know nothing about. But good news, Primal Scream Screamadelica is on the list, so we will get to it eventually. Thanks for keeping us honest.
We're going to make you host that one, Rob.
Sounds good. Next up, listener Dave writes, thanks to all of you who have been checking out both Spirit and Manic Street Preachers. I'd heard Spirit's Nature's Way before, but I didn't think much of it. But in the context of the entire album, I've gained a new appreciation of all of it. It's nice to hear the good elements of Frank Zappa's music in some songs without having to suffer through a Frank Zappa album. Keep up the good work.
That's a fair point. I love Zappa, but I can't argue with that.
Yeah. And honestly, Spirit is the album that I listen to the most out of all the albums that I discovered through this. Spirit is the album I listen to the most. Ironically, at this point, I'm not fucking with you, followed by Gang of Fours Entertainment.
Yeah, they're both up there for me too. They're great finds, but that Spirit record is a lot of fun. And I have one last one. This is Paul from Portsmouth, UK. Hi guys, longtime listener, first time emailer. I almost emailed you on 2 previous occasions. Outraged by your sloppy production standards. That time you criticized the harsh stereo panning on the Dr. John episode when you had clearly, to my headphoned ears, used mono mixes as samples. Until I realized that I'd flipped the mono audio switch on my Spotify settings.
Oh.
And it goes on. And that other time I got angry at you that you had clearly, perhaps maliciously, sped up your samples from Love's Forever Changes, an album for which you had very little love yourselves, until I realized I'd somehow set the playback speed to 1.25. Anyway, I was for once justifiably appalled when listening to your Beach Boys Today episode that you did not pick as your lowlight or even once mention the final track on that album, which is a 3-minute interview with the group called Bull Session with Big Daddy. And the first half of the running time is spent trying to sort out who ordered which sandwich, after which Brian Wilson offers up the disturbing revelation that out of the whole of Europe, the only thing that stuck out in his mind was the bread. However, the highlight, and the real reason I can't believe you mentioned it, the highlight has to be Dennis Wilson's warm send out to their Capitol Records representative in Europe, a man whose name is Dick Rising.
Oh, God.
What are the chances of such a name, I ask you?
That's so funny.
You're right. That was a gross miscalculation on our part to not bring that up. Obviously, that track is insane. I can't believe anyone would put that on an album. But given that we were already all voting no on the Beach Boys, it seemed like piling on. Anyway, he closes by saying, keep up the stellar work. You're the only essential podcast on my radar and the only thing that makes Monday mornings bearable. Best wishes.
Oh, that's awesome.
Only thing that makes Monday mornings bearable. Has this man tried day drinking?
Thank you so much for all your amazing emails. We love hearing from you guys. Whatever you want to tell us about what we got wrong, what we got right, extra context, please send it all over to 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, now we get to find out how we will spend our next week and what we'll be diving into. So for that, I will kick it back to Tom to dust off the Albinator.
All right, I got the Albinator. It is in an outfit that shouldn't make sense, but just is fucking unbearably cool on it. And I'm going to stroll it over here and see what it is going to pump out for next week. So without any further ado, drum roll, please. We will be listening to the album is Hot Fuss by the band The Killers. Does that have Mr. Brightside on it? I'm just going to go ahead and guess, right?
I think it has a bunch of hits on it, including that one, yeah.
What year was that? Is that late 2000s? Is that what we're talking here?
I think it was early 2000s because I remember living in Delaware and hearing this on the radio, like being played at a bar in 2004 and be like, are they still fucking playing this song? Jesus Christ.
Okay, a little bit of change of pace there. Still in a similar era of time, so we get to spend our time there. All right. Well, with that, I have been Alan.
I've been Marty.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Tom.
Whoosh!
I'm going to give a vibrato.
I didn't have it in me.